in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. My guest this evening thinks that the relationship between mother and daughter is the most crucial in a woman's life. With me tonight is Signe Hammer, whose most recent book is Mothers and Daughters, Daughters and Mothers. She is also editor of Women, Body and Culture, Essays on Sexuality of Women in a Changing Society. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
There hasn't been much interest in this subject to date, has there, Signe?
No, there hasn't. It's astonishing. We know an awful lot about the relationships between mothers and sons and between fathers and sons. They've been the subjects of literature, plays, psychoanalytic study. But mothers and daughters remains unexplored territory. And it's astonishing because it is a terribly important relationship, and many women take it completely for granted. Many of the women I spoke to for this book would tell me that they had never thought about their relationship with their mother until they got into consciousness raising or something like that.
Well, what have you done? I mean, how have you looked at it?
Well, what I've tried to do is explore it as it changes over the lifespan, starting with the pregnant woman and her relationship to her own mother and the coming daughter, going right through to adulthood and the relationship between grown daughters and their mothers. And it's focused around the material from interviews with mothers, daughters, grandmothers of all ages, from 4.5 to 80. And it's looking at two things, really, because the relationship is changing. Women's lives are changing. So you have a situation where I was looking at an unexplored relationship that is also changing. So I've tried to look at the traditional aspects of it and also to discover the ways in which it is changing and how that's affecting mothers and daughters today.
You see the mother and daughter relationship as sort of the bedrock relationship of a woman's life. In other words, it's crucial to all her other relationships.
Yes, it is. And this is a not well understood fact. I think it's not understood largely because women's relationships to men are the most important, to men and to children. And but after all, the relationship with the mother is the first one a woman has, and it's in the context of that relationship that she learns what it means to be a person, what society expects of her, that she learns what to think about her body, and it's a tremendously powerful relationship because the early emotions are, very, very strong.
Let's go into those three things in some detail.
The aspects of identity.
Yeah, the three aspects.
Well, what I've done for this book is sort of divided identity into the three aspects. What I call personal identity is really the sense of self, whether you have a sense of self or not. And one of the main themes of the book really is that most women do not grow up with a strong sense of self. They don't have a clear idea of often of the difference between themselves and another person, because we are structured, largely our lives are structured around relating to other people. We're expected to relate to men, to relate to our children, and whereas what we do ourselves is much less important. And this is something that starts, of course, very early on. This is something that starts in the earliest months of the mother-daughter relationship. And then sexual identity, not only the sense that I am a woman, of course, but your whole sense of your sexuality and your relationship to your body and your body's relationship to you. And this is another area where women have been shortchanged, I think. Most women traditionally have grown up with very little sense of their bodies, and the traditional literature, the endless talking about women's frigidity is really just, the outcome of this kind of situation. And the third thing is what I call role identity or gender identity. That's your social identity, sex roles, gender roles, and how society expects you to act. Or if I behave this way, I feel more like a woman, or if I behave that way, I feel less like a woman. I think, unfortunately, society thinks mainly in terms of roles, and the other two aspects of identity are shortchanged. I think if you have a strong sense of yourself and of your sexuality, roles become relatively unimportant. You can build a house or wear blue jeans or do whatever and not feel less of a woman. But if you haven't got those other two things, then roles become terribly important. And I think what happens, in fact, is that roles become a sort of defense behind which this personal insecurity and sexual insecurity hides.
One of the things that's very interesting in the book is that, you say that the central rites of passage for women are from daughter to motherhood, and they're all biological events. Would you like to
Well, there are, of course, three main biological rites of passage for women: puberty, then pregnancy and birth, and then menopause, and they are all biological. The central one, of course, is pregnancy and birth. That's the transition to motherhood, and that is traditionally the transition into adult life for a woman. You're not quite grown up until you have a baby of your own. Until you're a mother, you're still a daughter, and basically those are the ways in which women are identified. You're a daughter, or you're a mother, you're a wife, and so that what you do on your own is much less important as a way of defining you. There is no clear definition of what it means to be an adult woman outside of this biological activity, this transition. I think it's very unfortunate in a sense. It's very paradoxical that although women have been defined by their biology and essentially by their sexuality, because they've been defined by maternity, this has meant paradoxically the repression of other aspects of sexuality, including the sexuality involved in birth, because women are drugged and so on and so forth.
When you talk about separation in the book, separation between a mother and a daughter, or separation from a daughter from a mother, you mean something different than what the general population usually thinks. I mean, I think most mothers, especially of adolescent daughters, think, at some point my daughter is going to go away from me, physically. Mm-hmm. I think it's very interesting that, your definition is somewhat different.
Yes, it is. And this is a very important point, I think. What I mean is emotional separation, and what I mean by that is a sense of two separate people. Usually, what happens when a baby is first born, there's a state which is called symbiosis, where the baby doesn't really know that there is a mother who is separate from itself. And gradually, in the first months of life, it begins to acquire this knowledge, and hopefully begins to acquire a sense of itself as separate. I think that what happens all too often between mothers and daughters is that this separation, this emotional separation, is only partial. In really pathological cases, it's not even partial, and then you end up with a psychotic. But I think it has a lot to do with mothers and daughters being of the same sex, and of course that doesn't affect fathers and sons the same way, because there isn't that original intense closeness and mutuality. But I think it's very, very hard for mothers to make that transition themselves into having a dialogue with another person who is in fact separate from them. And of course it's hard because when you're pregnant, the infant is in fact not separate from you, and you have to go through some rather complex emotional procedures, really, I think, to do that. And if you have no strong sense of your own self as a person, then of course it's almost impossible to see this other person, this infant who is already a person, although a growing, developing person, as a separate human being. And I think, of course, it's particularly easy for a mother to over-identify with a daughter, again, because they're of the same sex. And you have your hopes, your fears, your anxieties, and so on are going to be projected very strongly into this child.
So you're really saying it's all sense of self. I mean, it's really what
I think so.
it all
I
boils
really
into.
I really do. I really think so. I think that is one of the main difficulties. I mean, everywhere I go in interviewing for this book, everywhere I went, you know, that's what I heard women saying to me. You know, I don't know who I am. I don't have a sense of myself. You know, I feel that I've been bound up in my mother. My mother was bound up in me, and
her mother.
And her mother. I mean, it's always any transaction between a mother and a daughter is at least three generational, because the mother is also reflecting back to her own relationship.
What do you think mothers want for their daughters? There's a woman in your book named Rose, and she talked about what she wanted for her daughter.
Well, I think, of course, different mothers want different things. Rose was talking about wanting her daughter to be a more successful version of herself, and this is a very common way. Again, I think it's a way of over-identifying with the child. Of course, it's done with sons too, but it's different with daughters, because there is that continuing tie. Again, a break from the mother is structured into the society. There's no structuring for a break from the mother until really marriage. That is the break from, you know, the break away from the mother. And of course, traditionally, what mothers want for their daughters is to be good and neat and clean and and to reflect well on them, you see. I mean, if my identity is bound up in this creature, then what she does is an aspect of my identity. And if she does something I disapprove of, then I feel like I have a problem, you see. When, of course, I don't.
What do you do about it? Do you know?
Well, again, I think that, about which?
About the over-identifying with the daughter. I mean, can a mother recognize this in herself and say, all right, I'm going to stop this?
Oh, mothers, that's what women are doing today, I think. I mean, this is, again, over and over again, this is what mothers would tell me, that they're discovering this about themselves. And what they would find is that in order to begin to separate themselves from their daughters, you can't let your daughter go emotionally unless you've separated yourself from your own mother. I mean, if she couldn't let you go, then you've got to let go of her. And then you can begin to let go of your daughter. And at the center of that has to be your ability to see yourself, you know, a defined person with your own boundaries of self, who isn't completely defined by these people around you.
There's another woman in your book called Tina who said that she found nothing in her mother or her mother's life that she wanted to identify with. And that's, you know, that's terribly sad, and yet we hear that kind of thing all the time.
I know, it's so sad, and I think in many respects I feel it's a very common problem, I think, of women, particularly women in their 30s who have come into consciousness of feminism. I think in many cases their mothers had the same problem, but they were not able to be as conscious of it. But when you're a child and you look around you to see what the future is going to be, and what you see is your mother, and that's what you see that you're going to become. And it's terrifying. In the first place, that adds to this binding together of the mother and daughter. Your future is your mother's future. And in the second place, here you are, in lively, intelligent, small human being, and perhaps you're interested in writing or painting or whatever, and what do you see? It doesn't lead anywhere. It all leads into this, and if you perceive that your mother is not happy, and that's another thing, it's the story of our generation, that our mothers were not, by and large, very happy because they had to make a choice. They didn't have the options that we've begun to have, and they had to make a choice and stick with it and pretend that it was terrific.
The other thing, though, Signe, is that mothers take the rap for everything.
I know, and that's one of the things I really tried very hard to do, was to point out that the mothers are themselves caught. It's like a continuum in time, that the mothers are passing along a kind of damage that has been done to them, and it's very complicated because it's in the individual situation it becomes a psychological problem, but it's really an environmentally caused situation. It's because of the way the roles are structured and the way women's lives are structured in the society that this damage happens, and then of course they pass the damage along.
Also, mothers have tremendous mythical power, don't they? I mean, children perceive them as very powerful people.
They do, and this is a very interesting point. One of the things I began to realize as I was working on this book is that there are two sides of this. The child perceives the mother as immensely powerful, and so that any mother, as a mother, is very powerful in the eyes of her children. And this is obviously true for sons as well as daughters. But at the same time, she may not feel powerful at all as a person. And this is a sense of resentment that daughters have, that their mothers were very, very powerful as mothers to them, but did not provide them with images of strong persons to give the daughter support while she was growing up.
All right, why did mothers have the trouble, differentiating between themselves and their daughters? I mean, I know you said before that it's because of their mothers and so on, but I mean, what is society saying to women, do you think?
Well, I think society has been saying to women that persons are men, and that women are not supposed to be persons. And if you live in this situation where non-self is the ideal, and where you therefore, your sense of self is bound up in the people who are around you, in your husband and your children, of course you're going to over-identify with your husband. I mean, wives are expected to vicariously identify with what their husbands are doing rather than doing something themselves. And of course you're going to over-identify with your children, and particularly with a daughter. So
that's what you think it means to be an adult woman, to be a non-person?
I think that's what it has meant. I think that that's changing.
Okay, there are lots of women in your book who seem to be trying to do something about it. It's sort of evolving a new kind of motherhood. What sort of attitudes are they taking?
Well, it generally starts, I think, not out of the idea of developing a new kind of motherhood, but out of the idea of changing their own lives.
And therefore their own relationships with
And once they start changing their lives, they discover that they can't relate to their mother anymore in the same way. They can't relate to their daughter anymore in the same way. Of course, they can't relate to their husband in the same way anymore either. But it has tremendous consequences for the relationship. They suddenly begin to start seeing their daughters as separate people, and go through great difficulties, and the daughters too, because it's a painful period of transition.
The sort of traditional view we have of it, especially the mother and the adolescent daughter, is problems with clothes.
Mm-hmm.
You're pulling my hair while you're combing it.
Yeah.
I hate you. That kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, this is there are various aspects of this. I mean, there's competition, which is universal between adolescent daughters and mothers, and control. I mean, part of it is a control aspect of a mother not wanting to let her daughter grow up, because in that case it does mean the daughter is going to physically separate herself from her. It also means the mother has to come to terms with getting older, and so on and so forth. But I think the difference is that our mothers very often were not able to be as aware of these issues, and a lot of control was expected. Again, because a daughter's behavior reflected on you, and your daughter had to be good.
So it's always been strictness and protectiveness, hasn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, this is only beginning to change, very recently. And of course, again, basically the reason for this is sexuality. It's for girls to be marriageable. That's really been the reason for it.
What kind of people, women, come out of this strict protective atmosphere, do you think?
Passive women. I mean, this has been demonstrated in longitudinal long-term tests. Psychologists have undertaken long-term tests following groups of children from infancy into adulthood, and testing every aspect of personality and behavior and parental behavior and so on. And this is one of the findings, that strictness and control does tend to produce passive.
But you don't advocate the other extreme. I mean, absolute permissiveness. I mean.
No, I think that's a complete cop-out. I think what I'm advocating is the hardest thing in the world, which is to realize that there's an interpersonal situation, that you have a real dialogue with another person, that is to be in touch. And of course, And it was easier to be a mother when you had accepted traditions and conventions. And everybody did the same thing, and everybody raised their daughters the same way. One mother, I interviewed her and several of her grown daughters, and she had 5 daughters, and 3 of them had been brought up in the pre-permissive period, and as she pointed out, everybody's daughter had to be home right after the dance, you know. And then along came her
I
next...
remember that.
You're right. And along came her next 2, and suddenly wearing pants to school and sneaking out the window at night to meet her boyfriend and so on and so forth. And this was a terrific strain because she had to start relating to the daughters in another way. She had to start thinking about the reality of this person and how is what she's doing affecting her. I think it's much harder to be a mother, you know, this way.
You know, in all of our defense, I mean, it's really we're experiencing a double burden. I mean, we're worried about ourselves and our own feelings about self, and we're also trying to communicate to our daughters. Isn't that true?
Yes, it is. It's terribly hard, and yet in some ways it's easier. At least the women that I've talked to who have been going through this process have found that the reward of this, as they became more and more themselves and started really thinking about their own interests without, again, giving up responsibility for their daughters. But there's a difference between responsibility and control. I mean, there's a sense of responsibility to this other person who, after all, still does need you. What has happened, and I've heard this on both sides, from daughters and from the mothers, that a new kind of communication has grown up because suddenly, you know, gee, here we are, 2 people, and there are things we have to talk about. Adolescent daughters whose mothers have been going through a period of growth and change are tremendously excited about it. You know, gee, I'm growing and my mother's growing too, and we're communicating. You know, she's not just sitting there. We're having fights, but they're not about why I can't wear this dress to the dance. They're about feminism or some, you know, because she's thinking about it and I'm thinking about it, but I'm more radical than she is. And as a sense of a dynamic kind of growing relationship, which is fantastic.
What do you think is realistic to expect to happen
In the future?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Or maybe you don't want to talk about that at all.
I think it's up for well, I think that women are going to go on changing their laws. I mean, I think there's a kind of consciousness that is growing, and it's a very deep-rooted thing, and it's a slow-growing thing. It's aside from ideology or anything else. And I think this is going to have an effect on, I think, women's the kinds of personalities we expect women to have are going to be different. As women become more independent, as their daughters become more independent, I think we're going to see enormous changes in child rearing, in marriages.
That brings to mind another thing. How does the relationship between the mother and the daughter affect the relationship between the daughter and men?
Well,
I know that's very complicated.
It's immensely complex, but it's very interesting. People tend not to believe it when I say that your relationship with your mother has as much and possibly more to do with your relationships later on with men than your relationship with your father. And this is sort of mind-boggling.
I think so.
But in fact, it's such a deep and intense relationship at such an early stage that you're going to take with you a lot of emotions that are going to later on come out in other situations with other people. Freud said, oddly enough, Freud recognized this in one of his last essays. Said that he thought that in a first marriage, the difficulties in a first marriage had to do, a woman's difficulties had to do with the fact that she was really working through her relationship with her mother. For instance, dependency. I mean, that's very curious. Daughters have been traditionally trained to be very dependent on their mothers first, and then later on to men. But the original training came in the mother-daughter situation. And then, of course, they're expected to grow up and be dependent on a husband. You see, but it really started back there with the early mother and daughter relationship. I think a lot of rage that women have is really rage at their mothers. And this is a very hard kind of rage. It often is expressed in terms of being rage at men. And I think women do have a lot of rage at men, but I think it's complicated because I think a lot of it is rage that comes out of this early relationship. And it's very hard for a child to express rage at his parent. It's very, very hard because a small child projects. It thinks, if I'm angry at you, that means you're angry at me. If I want to kill you, you want to kill me. So it's terrifying. So you can displace it onto other people. You can turn it against yourself. I mean, that's another thing women do a lot. They turn their anger at their mothers against themselves.
Now, you talk to a lot of women, mothers and daughters both. In what situations did you see the most sort of mutual respect and sense of self? I mean, what were the situations that seemed to you to produce exactly what you've been talking about?
Well,
a strong sense of self.
Well, there are several factors. I mean, basically, it's a situation in which a mother has a strong sense of self, and she may have arrived at that in various ways. I talked to only one or two women who really seemed to feel that they had gotten this from their mother. In many cases, it was something that they had decided to do for themselves, that they were going to take their lives in hand, and generally speaking, that had a lot of consequences. It had a lot of consequences for the marriage. They would either get out of a marriage because they couldn't relate in the same terms anymore, or they would restructure it, restructure the roles, restructure the way they related to their husband. And then, of course, they would restructure the way they related to their daughter. They would begin to let their daughter go. And it was one woman said that, she said, when my daughter was very small, I was on that repetitive track. I was like my mother, and my daughter was going to be like me. And then at some point, and she wasn't terribly clear about, exactly what had made her do this, but it had to do with getting divorced and starting to take her life into her own hands. She said it to me in terms of, I let my daughter go. And
that's really what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Signe, we're out of time. I thank you for being here. Signe's book is Mothers and Daughters, Daughters and Mothers. Thank you for watching.
Woman was produced by WNED-TV, which is solely responsible for its content, and was funded by public television stations, the Ford Foundation, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.